Okay, live Redhead Whiskey. Thank you for joining me for the daily interview and the daily broadcast from Redhead Whiskey. And today I am super, super excited to finally meet the person that I've been following, stalking for the past 6 months, Dr. Janice Fernheimer, which is, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Really, thank you for inviting me. It's a big privilege.
I met Janice through the Whiskey Lovers Facebook group that Gil Firth is managing, and I saw you writing there, and I went to see your profile, and I was just dumbfounded. I was like, wow, this woman is researching bourbon and women and Jewish heritage, and she's in Kentucky, and she does awesome cocktails. What's that? How did I not know you before? So, Janice, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I moved to Kentucky 16 years ago, sweet 16. I know we're all in a basketball kind of mood. To take a job at the University of Kentucky in writing. That's my home discipline is writing, rhetoric, and digital studies. And, when in Kentucky, it's time to figure out exactly what is, happening here. What are people interested in? What is compelling about the place? And there's so many wonderful things about Kentucky, but it doesn't take you long once you move here, and even perhaps before you do, that you realize that three of the things that are most important to people are basketball, of course, that's happening now, bourbon, and horses.
Yep.
And with my background in Jewish studies, I was really curious to see where and how Jewish folks have been involved in each of those things. And I got really interested in the bourbon part of things. So that's...
Yeah. So one by one, these are all amazing topics. So, yesterday we had Marianne Eves here, and we were talking about the role of women as distillers. And you were telling the story about bourbon and women through oral history. So what does that look like?
So actually my work on looking at or trying to discover and make more visible the Jewish roots in Kentucky started me down this path of oral history. The first oral history collection that I did once I was a faculty member here, and I got to give a wonderful shout out to my colleagues at UK Libraries and at the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History, and especially Dr. Doug.
What is oral history, just for us, simple people?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, oral history is interview-based history. It came about in the late 60s, early 70s, kind of as a talk back to capital H history, like this idea that there is one narrative and that it only is usually told from the perspective of dead men and, all kinds of other things. Not always the case, of course. But oral history was this movement to give voice to kind of everyday people and everyday experiences. And so it's usually interview-based. It's always interview-based, and it's recorded and often put in an archive. Of course, as digital technologies have evolved, more and more people have been able to conduct and record oral histories. And it also makes it more possible to preserve things, different stories from different types of people. So I was really interested in figuring out a way. I was learning about all of these really interesting Jewish stories, and I wanted to make them more publicly visible and accessible to a broader public, because even I, when I spent most of my life on the East Coast until I moved here, and throughout the South, and I thought, Kentucky, what's that got to do with Jewish things? And so the Jewish Kentucky Oral History Project was started, I want to say 2013, 2014, with really awesome support from the Jewish Heritage Fund, which was then called Excellent and is now just the Jewish Heritage Fund. It started with this pilot project of 12, 13 oral histories of the Jewish fraternity brothers who were members of Zeta Beta Tau at the University of Kentucky in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Wow. Really amazing group of men and really powerful and fascinating stories, listening to kind of where they ended up in the world. One of them ended up being a pretty successful Jewish basketball player.
You just so happen to have...
I find it's good to do things with props. The late Joel Gordon, he actually moved to Nashville, and if you go to the big JCC there, the Gordons are kind of big sponsors of that. But he was a Jewish basketball player, before the teams were integrated here or desegregated. And tells a really fascinating story. He was a proud member of ZBT. He came from a really small town in Kentucky called Crofton, where his parents owned a Jew store, which is a common kind of concept in the South, that there were Jewish-owned shops that offered dry goods and general store kind of items, often in more remote areas. Maybe they're the only Jewish family there. Maybe there are a couple of others. But they interact with folks who live there on the daily through these kind of exchanges. So his parents sent him to the UK, the big university, and he ended up being a pretty successful basketball player. And he went on to have a very successful career after that as well. But he got to start in this Jewish fraternity.
So how do you get from that to having almost 60 plus interviews with that focus on women in bourbon? Oh, by the way, I see people that are joining the live. You can ask questions. They can ask. Welcome to ask. Yeah, and hello to everyone who's joining. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Jewish Kentucky Oral History Project grew from this kind of small subset that we proposed. I think I know that there were interviews conducted this morning, and we've got like over 130 interviews in there now, and they range all over the place. But I was really interested. I had stumbled upon JT, who's my co-creator on the comic. We had both kind of been noticing some names as we were doing some tours on the Bourbon Trail, and started wanting to know more about Jewish influence in the Kentucky bourbon industry. So we started with some interviews of the amazing folks at Heaven Hill, Larry Cass and Max Shapira and Kate Latch Shapira, or Shapira Latz, forgive me, and several others. I think the first round of interviews was like 8 or 9 interviews with Jewish folks in the Kentucky bourbon industry. And then as I started to interact with and teach more for the certificate in distillation, wine, and brewing, which is, yes, we have the largest teaching distillery at the University of Kentucky. It's an amazing facility. If you haven't been there, any of you who are here might be coming to join us next week at the Beam Institute.
The Beam, yeah.
And so through that, I taught a lower division course on like writing for the industry. And then I got really interested in like all these, as a member of Bourbon Women, and seeing all these amazing women in the industry. And I was like, why is this not more readily accessible? Why don't we have a documented archival record of this? And my colleagues over at the Nunn Center, and Doug Boyd especially, we started thinking about how could we get students involved in this process of creating an archive of women's voices. And they say necessity is the mother of all invention. But in the spring of 2021, during the COVID pandemic, we were kind of just slowly climbing out of like full on isolation, but we hadn't quite come back, if I'm remembering the timing correctly, to doing things fully in person. And the studio was kind of, it was a big deal to ask someone to come do something in person. And worked with students to create a way for folks to do video oral histories by Zoom.
Beautiful.
Students were like involved at the ground level up and continue to be involved, and will be showcasing posters based on their work for the Women in Bourbon Oral History Project.
I know we're tight on time with you today. No, that's okay. It's good. I have so many questions. I do want to talk about the comic, but before that, just one thing that I did want to ask is, what's the one single surprising thing that you've learned from those interviews?
So there are 2 things. So the first thing is, when we reach out to ask people if they want to be interviewed, no matter how famous or amazing they are, even someone like Mary Ann, right? First female distiller since Prohibition in Kentucky. Oh, me? You want to interview me? Is it really me in the collection? Are you sure about that? And it just kind of points to, I think, the ways that women are kind of culturally shaped, encouraged to kind of take be self-effacing in a certain way, to not always recognize our own power and worth. And that wasn't like at any one particular person, but it's just amazing to me how these super famous, super important contributors are totally excited to be interviewed by me, students, or anyone else. And then the second thing, kind of apropos of our pre-conversation, is just how many working moms there are. And there were, and how hard it is, and how resilient folks are in terms of navigating all of the competing demands on time when you're raising small humans and also trying to break through the glass ceiling and, drag more seats to the table so that there are more diverse folks around it.
So let's. I know you need to leave soon, but let's talk about your web comic project. To me, it's fascinating that someone who's so into the written word chooses a different medium. So tell us a little about the project and why you chose comic.
Yeah, so the project is called America's Chosen Spirit, and it's kind of a nod to the idea that folks sometimes refer to people both positively and negatively, to Jewish folks as the chosen people. But America's native spirit, or bourbon, right, the only federally regulated spirit in the US is bourbon, and that we wanted this story about Jewish involvement, African-American involvement, the involvement of folks in the LGBTQ plus community, and women. We know the stories are there, right? And how JT and I met is a fun story too. I was directing Jewish studies, and we invited him to give a talk on his most recent book. He had just finished a project with the late Harvey Pekar, and he came to talk, and this was like, in the early, like 2012, 2013, you could still buy Pappy, right? And it wasn't cheap, but it was in the store, right?
Yeah.
We had a couple bottles at the house, and so we gave him a little tasting, and he got excited. He did the tour, started seeing Jewish names, and started asking questions. And we thought, wow, if we two really interested in quirky Jewish history kind of people don't know this story, who else doesn't know this story? And how do you reach a really broad audience? And we thought he's, of course, a very gifted and acclaimed author and illustrator in comics. And we thought, let's make a comic.
That's amazing.
That was 13 years ago. We're about to approach the comics bat mitzvah, which we'll be celebrating at Beam next week. So if you're coming, please stop by. We'll have a booth. And you can find it for free on Webtoon, at least chapter 1.
I'll put the link in the description of the video so that everyone can see
it. But that was the real motivation, was trying to figure out a way to tell a story that would reach the broadest possible audience, and to also engage in historical fiction that allowed us to play, to take some of the real narratives that we've encountered in the archives and use them as inspiration to rethink the way that we think about history, bourbon's history, America's history.
So we have a couple of more minutes. Is there something that you want to add, or do you want to dive into the topic of teaching bourbon and how students that are born and raised in Kentucky are responding to your teaching of it?
Yeah, sure. I actually just sent an email to my students this morning. I said, get ready. Here comes the Beam. They're going to be giving poster sessions next week on the work that they've done for the Women in Bourbon Oral History Project. And I love that they have the opportunity to share their research with folks in the industry in that way. And I know they're going to do an amazing job. I think you had asked either here or somewhere else what they find surprising, I think, is just how much broader the involvement of a wider variety of folks than maybe you always see represented in your imagination at first, of folks in the industry, and how it's really begun to open doors in a way. I mean, the women have always been there, African Americans have always been there. We haven't always been paying attention to them or giving them the credit they deserve, but they're there. And I think seeing that history and the longevity, or the long trajectory of that history, is really eye-opening and really inspiring for a lot of folks. When you see yourself somewhere, then you can begin to imagine yourself in that place. And that's 100%. Powerful.
I'm imagining myself in the Kentucky University with you in next week's session. So maybe I will be there. Maybe I will be there. So thank you so much. We're gonna release you to your other duties, as we've just talked about, the other jobs that you might have lined up for today. Well, Janice, you just opened my appetite to talk more with you. So I'm sure we're going to set up a follow-up session to deep dive into other topics. But it was a pleasure and an honor. And I hope to see you face to face in a few months.
I'm looking forward to it. We definitely need an occasion to raise a real glass together. So thank you again for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone or anyone who tuned in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Janice. Bye. Cheers.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Kampai and Slanger.
Yes, all of them.
Bye-bye.
Bye.